I acknowledge the continuing connection to culture, lands, waterways, and communities of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, here being the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung, and Bunurong people. We pay respects to their elders, ancestors, and storytellers who have maintained spiritual customs of women's business and men's business, passing ancestral knowledge through generations of kin.
For us to speak up, there's a lot of fear about speaking up, because if you speak up, then yes, you could get your contracts cancelled. You may not get you may not be thought of for jobs. You may not be you're just not going to be cast.
Hi, welcome to Colour Outside the Lines. I'm Tasneem Chopra.
And I'm Leah Vandenberg.
So the topic today is the cost of free speech and how artists specifically have, from history to right now, have used their platform to advocate for issues that the humble regular person can't, for different reasons, how arts can be provocative. And when I tell you, what does free speech mean to you as an artist, what's the first thing that comes into your mind?
To thine own self be true. That quote actually has been my driver about how I can't not speak up if it doesn't feel true. So
is that linked to you as an artist?
Yeah, because it determines what kind of work I take. So if I get work that's going to be about promoting the de-shelling of turtles, then I'm not going to be doing that work, am I? So I have to. My values are always going to influence what work I take. Even in comedy, it's like, what are we actually laughing at? So,
and if we take back this idea of free speech and artists being provocative to its origins, right? I remember you told me there's this expression, the expression "off with his head," or off with his head.
Off with his head. Yeah, but it's even like from Henry VIII. And if there was like political dissent, then Sir Thomas More is an example. He, off with his head, and Henry VIII like would decapitate his wives. But even before that, we've had forms like theatre going back, 400 BCEs of ancient Greek and Roman theatre was not just about entertainment, it was also about a platform for protest. And I think the play Antigone is an example of that as well, which is still being used in contemporary times as a play that's challenging authority and diving into the moral imperative of how we live. And I think the moral imperative is actually what's driving artists to speak out in terms of how they can challenge authoritarian spaces when they're not working as well.
The idea of off with the head, the decapitation, that specifically then related to artists who went too far, perhaps. Is it then for their lords to say, right, I didn't like that comment, that was too provocative, that was too much truth-telling to power, so therefore, I'm going to eliminate you, kind of thing.
That's right. Yeah, because he was, Thomas More was a writer as well, I think. And yeah, so if you spoke up against that totalitarian or authoritarian state, or you were challenging that, then yeah, off with your head. And that's kind of in a place where when we jump 2,000 years ahead, like where are we now in terms of that, the final blow being death? And in fact, in the last 18 months, with people protesting about what's happening in the world, we are still getting very off with his head in a way that people are getting death threats, are getting their livelihoods cut off, are getting cancelled and smeared, and all of the consequences that are happening to artists.
And that's interesting because I would say, not minimizing at all what's happening currently now, and yeah, the full circle moment of now death threats being made against artists who do use their platform to protest. But in the 60s and 70s and 80s, I recall strongly artists would, if we were to look at Hollywood as an example, where they used their platform, people like Jane Fonda, who spoke out against, she spoke out in favor of the civil rights movement, on the environment, that's more recently, but on feminism. And when she used her platform, the accolades she received, the amount of public support that it ended up engendering, and forcing authorities to then
Mm.
think twice and do differently on what otherwise would have been a very conservative and problematic choice or path that it was taking. She used that name and brand that she had as an artist to be an activist and to elicit change. Marlon Brando, very similar on issues facing Native Americans. He famously, boycotted the Academy Awards and sent in his place when he received his award for The Godfather, a Native American woman to take it on. I remember it was an iconic moment, and she
Mm.
stood up, and there was boos and hisses from the audience, but he put it on the map as an artist. He
Spotlighted it.
used his platform. It
Yeah.
was powerful,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And I
Would
think
have celebrated those
that's the
days.
power of the celebrity on the world stage, is that they can spotlight and create awareness and start movements from that. I mean, Jane Fonda did have consequences. I mean, she got arrested. I think she's been arrested more than once. Um, and and yet she
But
was
it
able
never
to.
affected her. It never seemed to have affected her career. I mean, she still
Well,
continued to make films and still does, and TV series, and none of that has dwindled. But
well,
as
she
you
was
point out,
established at that point, though. Yeah, like she's already up there as a top tier actor. The lower tier actors are the ones having that there's probably more at risk in a way, because they we we are going from gig to gig. For us to speak up, there's a lot of fear about speaking up, because if you speak up, then yes, you could get your contracts cancelled. You may not get you, you may not be thought of for jobs. You may not be You're just not going to be cast because of who, and that's the other question. Um, how Who's making these decisions about what's acceptable free speech and what's punishable?
well, I think there's
So
something to be said for the issue which they're arguing for. Now, it's interesting. Back in the 80s, I recall when South Africa was an apartheid country at the time, there was a movement, a massive movement, a BDS movement globally around boycotting, divestment, and sanctions being placed against South Africa in order to force its hand in ending its apartheid status, right? And one of the, again, linking this back to artists, there was a famous group that formed called Artists United Against Apartheid.
mm,
They collaborated and dropped a song called Sun City, which was a very posh holiday resort in South Africa. And the song was that artists weren't going to go there anymore because they didn't want to support apartheid. And that to me, I remember when I heard that song, for me, it birthed such an interest in the power of arts in activism, because here were all these artists uniting against apartheid to elicit an outcome. And the impact that had, if we look back now, they were part of the movement that ended, as artists, they were part of the movement that ended apartheid. So the power of artists in using their platform
mm.
does elicit social change, and it does have an impact. But when I think back to some of the artists involved with that issue, people like even, and Jane Fonda's and the Marlon Brandos, yes, they did have bumps, but their careers didn't seem to dwindle entirely or be cancelled to the extent as what we have seen for artists in the last 18 months. You're
Well,
absolutely
perhaps there was less at risk as well at that time, which gave other artists the confidence to join that circle of solidarity. And so they were able to go, yeah, I am jumping on board with this because I know there's something morally wrong. And so that the backlash may have been less. That I think now the consequences are higher, which is why we can name the artists.
What are some of the artists that you've picked up on who've really had negative impact, either Australia
Oh,
or
I've had a negative impact.
yeah?
Well, I think of Khalid Abdullah, who was in The Crown, and he's
Mhm.
under police investigation.
Mhm.
And he's speaking with commentators like Francesca Albanese and saying, here I am, I'm an actor, and I haven't started any historic movement. I am just speaking out about the injustices that I'm witnessing with my own eyes. So, I mean, he certainly had that backlash. And then we've got Jason Gillum, who is the pianist who was with the MSO, and he's had gigs cancelled.
Well, he's
Uh,
currently got a case pending, hasn't he, with in no, he's with the MSO that he's sued presumably for the impact that that decision has had on his livelihood, and I think there are aspects of it that are still ongoing. But you're right, using his platform, I think it was to perform a piece which he dedicated to slain journalists.
that's right.
And then there
Yeah.
was the
Yeah.
And then switching back to the US, there's the children's presenter, Miss Rachel.
Miss Rachel, that's probably the one of the most recent and one of the most surprising because uh she's a YouTube entertainer for children with millions of
Millions of
followers.
followers. Yeah, right.
Millions,
Yeah.
millions. And her whole uh
It's so controversial that she said.
purpose is to is to entertain children. And her deep love and care for children is something that I resonate
What did she say
with.
that was so controversial?
She's started a fundraiser and for children in Palestine. And so that has had a backlash on her. But she's honestly just speaking about the harms that children are experiencing.
Mhm.
And so children have human rights. These rights are not just for some children, they are for all children. Standing up for children, especially those who are most vulnerable, is the right thing to do. And that's on her Instagram page. So here we have a children's presenter, you know, facing
Yeah.
it backlash from commentary
I think
and
for me,
like this.
it's the alarming overreaction to statements or positions that are taken on issues that in any other context would be innocuous. I was at a speech or presentation by a doctor who recently returned from, I think, a
Oh
deployment,
yeah.
and he made a comment that providing food and medical aid for children shouldn't be political. It
Mm,
shouldn't be seen as a political issue. Saving
mm,
children's lives shouldn't be seen as a political issue. And I think linking that back to what Miss Rachel does for
mm,
anything, which is to educate, stimulate, and provide knowledge for children. And
mm.
at the back of that, seeing what she has seen to then speak out and say, let's try and help these children, to then be come for and be targeted after that seems.
That's right. I've actually seen footage of children in refugee camps watching Miss Rachel on their
Oh,
device because
wow.
that's and just seeing that child have access to play, and that is a human right, access to play, and just seeing how she's actually having the impact even on the ground for children. It's so impactful. So I think Guy Pearce as well. He's spoken about it not being political as well. He's just in a recent release this week, not maybe this month anyway, and he's said this is he's saying, can we please speak up? And he's asking for other artists to speak up, and he's acknowledging that artists are afraid of professional fallout. Um, and he acknowledges that these fears are real, but he's saying this is not a call to politics, but a call to conscience. And I think that's
Yeah.
that,
And the impact, again, using his platform to do that potentially could come at cost we've yet to see. We don't know. I think of, again, casting it back to Hollywood last year at the Oscars, Jonathan Glazer took out an award for his film, Zone of Interest. And when he produced that, and when he took out the award for that film, I mean, he did. He came under a lot of flack. And I should point out, he's a Jewish director.
mm,
He came out speaking out in support of movements to end what was the atrocities impacting those in the region. And it would seem that anyone and everyone who was at that point aligning themselves to that cause was facing media attacks, having gigs cancelled, being blacklisted in the industry from even colleagues at that point in time, irrespective of the fact that he even had a cultural link to the area and to the region.
mm,
That didn't seem to matter. So if you're caring for children, whether you're, from the Jewish diaspora, whether you're from um, you know, dare I say, even Palestinian Arab communities, and you're speaking out for the stop the killing of innocent children. Somehow, at every level, you're being cancelled in either a subtle or a really profound way. I think I'm seeing that come through.
yeah. Well, Susan Sarandon lost her agent, so lost representation. So that
Yeah. Okay.
again. I'll sort of argue these are people who are in a top tier, and their livelihoods may not be as impacted as someone who's early in their career, but still to lose representation, we all need representation in order to survive in this industry. Um,
But you flip that
that's
on it.
arguable as well.
You flip that on its head and look at some of what have been the repercussions. There's the industry cancellation, yes, and the cancelling of gigs, and there are often there are death threats that accompany that. So not to minimize any of that, But I'm also looking at what has been some of the reaction from the masses. And you look at artists who've used their platform like Kneecap, like Macklemore, for example,
Mm,
and there are other musicians as well who have used their stage presence to call things out, whether it's when they receive an award, whether they're performing a concert and what they've done with it, and wearing a badge, whether it's Mark Ruffalo or Billie Eilish, though they've gone out there. It has actually, I think it's resulted in this movement and an
mm,
acknowledgement, particularly from younger generations who see right through the radar and through the filter of, you know, knee-jerk cancellations without any due process. They sort of think, well, hang on, no, that doesn't seem right. And we're talking about a generation that's, raised Malala Yousafzai and Greta Thunberg. They don't just let anything slide. They want to know. They dig deep and they research. So they're looking at this and saying, no, this doesn't resonate with me. And there's an
mm.
Australian artist, a Queensland-based vocalist, I Am May, who wrote a song that came out last year called Carmageddon. Now, I encourage any listeners out there to pick it up and have a listen to the lyrics, which are pretty intelligently and well crafted. And she speaks to so many injustices globally, from violence against women to big pharma, to what's going on in Gaza, to to corporate greed. And when she released her song, her agents dropped her as well. She's a
Mm.
small fry compared to Susan Sarandon. But the uptake of people downloading her song from different streaming services was insane because they wanted to know. I mean, it's the first thing one of the first tricks you do to promote an artist is to cancel them in many ways, because then everybody wants to know what's the big deal. And I
Mm.
feel like this is the way we're at. When artists are being cancelled left, right, and center, we're increasingly thinking they must be really saying something either that's incredibly provocative or incredibly true.
So why then, if there's some positive consequences from speaking out, why then are we in a place where there's actually, I would say, in my experience, there's and even just keeping it Australia centric, there's very few Australians who are speaking out around political or
In the
injustices.
artist sphere. Mm.
Yeah, and so even though there's like, and we know that if more people come together, then we can create a movement. And yet there is still a fear that you're going to be cancelled, or even in international travel, your visas are going to be um, denied, or you could be detained. It's so that there is a lot of positives about speaking your truth, but at the same time, um, are we in a place, is the fear actually winning in this race? As I still have colleagues and friends who we're not talking about it. They're not talking about it. What's going on?
I know,
And I
and
go,
it's important to, I think, also acknowledge that in real time, there are many of us who can see exactly what's going on in the region on our phones daily, and the escalation of that, especially after events like Easter time and Mother's Day, our grief is amplified when we see how
mm.
things are.
It's a really tough place. I think it's a really tough place for artists right now. I mean, even when you think about the industry, I'm talking about screen industry, like it's still recovering from COVID. So there's the kinds of work that are being made are probably more risk adverse in terms of being safer, um, because people are trying to just get back to.
They want to, I mean, it'd be great if we could rewind the world and get back to a better time, but that's not possible. And for me, I'll go back to the moment when the BDS movement ended apartheid in South Africa, and it did happen, and it could happen, whether it was industry or whether it was artists or whatever the movement was. It forced the country to comply and do differently because the inequity and the racial injustice was just so glaringly obvious that every artist could speak out and was not being cancelled for it. And
Mm.
I would like to believe and think that humanity and goodness and decency ultimately will prevail. And the atrocities being so glaringly in our face every day are bringing more and more people, even if it's politicians, to force them to change their position and change or realign their views simply to a humanity-centered framework. And if they're doing that, it is really hard to ignore what's going on and the extent of it. But what can we do? I think showing support, solidarity, there are different ways that artists are doing that, either by speaking up and out, by using their platform to support others and the cause. Yeah, wearing a pin, wearing some clothing. I remember Kate Blanchett's outfit, it was at the Oscars, the BAFTAs or some awards last year, was very distinctly coloured in I think the flags of the colours of the flag of
Yeah,
Palestine. I
yeah.
didn't I
And
didn't notice when someone picked it up.
I'm in agreement with you wholeheartedly that a world movement can be created if people speak up. I think as an artist, I'm concerned about why we're not feeling so confident to be able to do that and why there aren't more of us to be able to create a world movement that is about challenging the status quo and about calling out injustice. It's a like I wholeheartedly believe that especially with the digital world, we can create a movement. We can do
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
But there's what's winning at the moment? Is it this impulse to change, or is it there a fear that's going to be a backlash on you professionally?
I think the fear is real and I think it's been
Mm.
established. There are definitely consequences. That said, I think there are definitely also movements, isolated movements in many ways, where people
Yeah.
are working on this in their own circles. Um,
Mm.
and if you look at the power of if we were all to bring ourselves together, and
Mm.
what could that achieve? But there are artists speaking out from all communities, from the Arab communities, from the non-Arab, from the Jewish communities, from the atheists, from the agnostics. They're all coming out and saying the same thing in different iterations, which we do not support, the ongoing mass slaughter and
And I think,
annihilation of
yeah,
communities happening. And we are united in that.
we are. I think
There's
we
some,
are.
there's
We're
some
united
scope. There
in our
is,
collective humanity, really. That's
I
yeah.
think there's a comfort in knowing this is not an isolated voice. The voice and the argument that we're both discussing here, we both feel solidarity for, is shared across borders, is shared across faiths, is shared across professions. I
Mm.
think it's artists, however, that have faced amongst the highest cost for speaking out because they have platforms. If they didn't have a
Well,
platform, it would
that's
be
right.
right.
That's right. And there's the Moises Kaufman, the playwright, was saying recently around Trump's just proposing to cancel all the arts funding for theatres and grants. And so he was saying that, yes, we as artists, they're taking away, they want us to feel fear because they know that we are so powerful because we actually have the stage. We have this platform of power. They weren't his exact words, but that's me
That's that's
paraphrasing.
that's so
And
powerful
but
because
it
that
is the
means that, as individuals who are not in the art world but who are the consumers, without us going to your plays or to your films or reading your books or attending your theatre, none of us, without us actually being there, you'll have no audience. But if you're going to use your platform and take a strong stand on an issue, that's going to reach the heart of the pundit and of the person who's attending. So that is really powerful.
yeah. Well, what does Louise Adler say? Art's always political, and when it isn't, it's meaningless. Um, and it is. Art is political. I mean, you can find a reason or a purpose in most writing that is going to have some kind of political sway. And there's actually something that just talking about with the power of increasing this circle of solidarity, and that Khalid Abdullah, the actor I was talking about before, he's said that in the rise of this authoritarian disciplining that we're all experiencing across culture and media and universities as well. He said there's a moral spine of the world regenerating from ground up. And I love that because it's like it's saying that there's a space of consciousness that's animating deep realignments, and the cultural and narrative renewal this represents is formidable. So I feel like there's a real call for that solidarity, but also call into action. And we know that it can make a difference. It's just doing it all together, which is what Guy Pearce is saying. Can we all just speak up? Because if we do it all together, then we are a force. We really are as
there's a lot of
artists.
power in solidarity, and another color that comes to mind straight away is the artist Khalid Subsibi, whose work was
Yeah,
shortlisted for the Biennale, and
yeah.
then almost as soon as it was shortlisted, it was then pulled back and pulled out, and he was effectively then
Mm,
cancelled by the very
mm,
organization that platformed him. The
mm.
ensuing support and solidarity he got from a petition which had
Yeah,
thousands of
yeah.
artists and artist adjacent professionals who said this is wrong, reinstate him. This
Mm.
is a, it degrades both the Australian artistic community as
And
well.
the Media, Entertainment and Arts Alliance came out and said, um, in support of him as well, and just saying that um, the arts and freedom of expression are closely entwined,
Again,
and that relationship is essential to the creation of art in all its time. And um,
which links back to what
this
we
is an industrial
saying.
and workplace issue, when one
Linking
that
back to
goes to
the
great,
impact of arts and being, like you said, it is political, it is provocative, it's going to shift
and the
thought.
rights of the artist.
To have that many people behind you as an artist and have that much solidarity and support does show that in fact artists are they do have mass public support and appeal behind what they do. But it's the individuals in positions of power in certain areas that are causing this cancellation to be affected, and calling that out, holding them to account is our challenge at this particular point. Because clearly the massive support is behind these artists. The massive support is behind the average person doesn't support the annihilation and murder of children.
Mm.
The average
And not
person,
every artist thinks like
oh,
this either. I think I'm going to say that as well. There are artists who simply just who don't necessarily have uh, uh, feel like that's part of their purpose to be political. I mean, it's not every artist that does that. But from my side of things, it's like I've always considered us as more professional empaths. So we're here and our antennae is just soaking it up, and then our job on the day is to actually step into the shoes of whatever world we're in, and the person who's in that world, and bring that out in in the most authentic way.
and that's
And
that's a powerful role to take, and a lot of responsibility as well. And I think that's why you, as artists, have the appeal that you do. Now, I guess, look, as we close, Leah, I'm going to ask you, as an artist, what keeps you motivated and grounded in a space of arts where you're called to do the right thing and you're called to act with humanitarian intent is potentially under fire at times? Do you cower, or do you continue to fight and just, maybe be,
it's not even a question, is it, Tasneem, really? I think th when I was saying, like, to thine own self be true, it reverberates through my body if I am not speaking my truth,
mm,
or speak, truth to power, or it does not sit
um,
comfortably with me.
power
And there
to,
are very many uncomfortable truths that have to be told and said. And if if I don't listen to that within myself, then
well, yeah, who was it what's that famous
what
quote? If not me, then who? If not now,
mm,
then right? It's a
yeah.
call to artists, it's a
But
call
it's
to
not really a
movement.
question. It's
Yeah.
in the body. And like for you, in your position as a consultant and diversity and inclusion and commentator, like how do you feel? I know, and you are an artist now. You've done some stand up. Hello.
Okay, that's a
As
whole
an
other
artist.
that's a whole other podcast. But no, I think again, anybody with even a small platform like I might have to not use the small platform that I have to speak out against what I see to be injustices, whether it's environmental or humanitarian, whatever that might be, is a dereliction of duty. I do have a
There you
responsibility.
go.
And that's a call that's both moral, both spiritual, on both those fronts. And I feel that I see a simpatico with that and artists as well.
Here to that. I think that's why we're friends.
That's that and both because we're both actually quite funny. But we'll leave that for another podcast. Thank
Yeah.
you, Leah. It's been great chatting and just,
Thanks,
yeah,
Tasneem.
hearing those frustrations, but also the hope, the quiet hope that things get better
Yeah. What is it? Regenerating the
from the
moral spine of the world from the
generating.
ground up. Yeah.
How hard can that be?
We're doing it. We're doing it.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you to
And
all the artists who speak up as
yeah,
well.
thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Thank you to the truth tellers and to the
Yeah.
artists, absolutely, for holding up a mirror to authority and to the world to do better.
Yeah, we got ya.
Peace out.